All right, guys, we're back. We got a fun title today. I'm sure you guys are loving this one. Loving this one. Let's see here. Title today. Let me get this going. Let me get this going on Twitter. Super clickbaity, isn't it? But actually, it's not clickbaity because we're going to be talking about it. One second. One second, peeps. How are we doing? How are we doing? All right. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. So, we got some fun topics today to talk about, but this is not a Q&A, by the way. We're tackling as one of the two specific topics that are linked together. As the title says, in Defense of Sluts. And yes, CC is going to be big tonight too. We got the COVID cabal right after this. But first, let's check out the wines right here. So, I broke our little trend just because these were open for dinner tonight. We have Sicilian Bianco and a Sicilian Tinto, I guess, a red one from Italy, and they're quite fantastic. I had a little bit of it tonight with dinner, just a little taste, simple little taste. But even though these are not formal ones like Etna Bianco, Etna Rosso, it's they have a lot of the same characteristics, and I always find Sicilian whites to be shouldn't be surprising, but I always find them to be surprisingly complicated and delicious. Like there's a lot going on with them. So with this one, you got like lychee on the nose. Never thought I'd really use that word genuinely, but that's a lychee fruit. It's very tropical fruit on the nose, but on the palate, it's so complex. You got all these different little spices going on here. It's just rich and flavorful. Apples, cinnamon. It's just really well done. Really, really well done wine. And then the red here. So this is like a more of a black fruit plum, very cooked with cloves. And when you try it, it's much lighter. So the fruit becomes much more of like a black currant and very, very ripe and juicy. Quite good wines, these ones. You can get them together. Etna Bianco, Etna Rosso. All right. So, in Defense of Sluts, why would we be defending sluts? Okay. And I want to talk about a couple of different things here that are related to it. But the first one is that you see a lot of, since this part of Twitter is very reactionary, and so we see a lot of promiscuity, we see a lot of good girls gone bad and sort of degenerate behavior encouraged. And so there's a real inclination among people to really just, push aside girls because they're promiscuous, because they're sluts, right? And that these girls are bad. There's no place for them, and that in a healthy society there wouldn't be any of these. Girls wouldn't be doing the kind of selling images of their holes. They wouldn't be doing any of this stuff. Everything would be great. Everything would be perfect. Everything would be, prim and proper, conservative. Well, got news for you guys. Got news for you. That's not how it's ever been. It's not how it's ever been. And what I want to emphasize here is that it's not the existence of sluts, so to speak, that's the problem. The issue is that it's become normalized and mainstreamed so that every girl is, or most girls are at least influenced heavily by it. Within women and men, there's a wide range of personalities and behaviors. And there are frankly a lot of reasons for that on a, you could say, use it as an evolutionary standpoint, right? But um, within a population, you have most guys are going to be guys who hold down the fort. You have some guys who are clear leaders, and then you have some guys who are sort of not part of the main crowd and off to the side, um, but maybe have some sort of appeal on a sexual level. And of course, you also have criminals, right? You have these different archetypes. Jackson, what's up, man? What's up, man? So the point is, even among men, you have this range of behaviors. You see the manosphere talk about it all the time, like, alpha versus beta, which is not even a full capture of these archetypes of men, but, maybe hits two of the most main ones. You hear a lot also about the Sigma grind set, right? The Sigma male who is good with women, but is totally out of the dominance hierarchy. He kind of pulls them off, girls off from the side. Okay. Well, without going, I don't know that the female hierarchy is quite as complex, but good girls and bad girls and promiscuous girls, there's always this place for promiscuous girls in a society. In fact, the reality is that there would be no society for good girls if there were no promiscuous girls. Okay. Because they actually exist in tension with each other, because one is the shadow of the other. That's on a psychological standpoint. On a practical standpoint, let's think about this for a second. So you have a lot of guys who are horny and trying to deal with their desire, their sexual energy. And you have a set of girls, and they want to get married and they want to have kids and they want to be, they don't want to be spoiled, they don't want to be, and frankly the guys don't want to spoil them either. The guys have this Madonna fixation on a lot of these girls, and they want these girls to be pure and perfect, right? But they also have this like dark desire um, for sex, and they crave on a certain level the impurity, right? And so this is where the slut comes in. So one of the things that always just frustrates me is when I hear people complain about the existence of these women, is that there probably a handful of girls. You got Tiffany, right? Tiffany was good enough in high school to sleep with 20 guys. And so Tiffany gave 20 guys experience that they were able to then get it, so to speak, out of their system. They were able to explore, they were able to experience something without putting pressure on the Sarahs, on the Daphnes, on, I'm giving some crazy names here. These girls who were not going to go that direction. And so the looser girl allows actually a sort of tension valve on society. And you take that to the next level, right? And you look at it when, it's outside of high school, it's outside of, and you get to be adults. There's that subset of women, right? And let's just say they're 10%, and maybe it's even a little bit lower than 10%, but let's say it's 10% of women. I think 10% is a pretty fair estimate that encompasses the entire range of women who are either sex workers, prostitutes, right? Or are quite libertine with their bodies. And so they've had quite a few guys pass through. Those women provide something that allows your average girl to not do those things. Now, personally, right, I'm somebody who's all about integration, and I do think it's valuable for the good girls to integrate this sort of sexual side. And let's be fair, just because a girl is not promiscuous, it doesn't mean she's not sexual. They're two different things. But I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that sluts have and always will play a very important role in society. The problem is not that they exist. I mean, if you had an army, think about this for a second. I'm going to give a really practical, you might say it's archaic, but a very practical example of this. If you were to go back to the times when you had armies go through an area, I guess we kind of have that going on again, don't we? But if you were to go back to that time period, what would stop an army when it goes through, a town, it's occupied a territory? Hey, it could even be the country's own army. They're just based in a certain location. So you have an enormous number of men. You have a small town, 10,000 person town, right? And you have 10,000 men deployed there on top of the 10,000 local population. What's going to happen to the girls in that town? Well, if you're lucky, and this is being a little ironic here, that these girls are going to marry one of the soldiers, but more likely these soldiers are going to be horny as hell and trying to go after these daughters, these local girls. Whenever there's a military movement, whenever there's a base, there's a very lively prostitution scene. And the reason for that is that those men are able to have a outlet, and you can say, oh, it's not a healthy outlet, but it is actually, relatively speaking, a healthy outlet. And it redirects all that male energy to this direction. Now, today, it's been a little bit reduced because of porn, because porn in its own way kind of acts as this. But at the same time, it's not a full, compensation. But I want to make a comment here because I think it's really important. My argument with this video, and what I'm trying to point out here, is not that it's good to have what we have today, because what we have today is a massive abnormality of what's normal, right? It's a massive abnormality of what's normal. Normal in society was having this 10%. And then the next 90% of women, and that 10% was frankly shunned. They were in sort of these red light districts, these lower areas. The 90%, those women were by and large going to end up being married, right? I think the consistent, if I recall from marriage statistics, at least in the United States, pretty consistently up until the sexual revolution, you had an 80% marriage rate, except in the 50s where you had a 90% marriage rate. So you can actually see that the 50s were abnormal in a lot of ways. They kind of pushed it a little bit too far in the 50s, but even consistently 1900, 1910, 1920, that whole period, it was about 80% of women would end up being married. And so you can say you have 10% are libertine or prostitutes, and then you have 80% are married. Then you have 10% that are maybe some mix between totally lifelong virgins, more nuns, or maybe there's a little bit more on the other side. They couldn't find somebody for whatever reason. But the point here is that 10 to 20 tops percent of women make it okay for the remaining 80%. Now, what's interesting is that today, because of the major programming, we've had your average girl shift over in that direction. And so you still have this 10 to 20% of extremely, now it's like out of control promiscuous girls. But then you have the average middle girl at least willing to experiment in some of that behavior, whereas before she wouldn't be. And that's really where the main issue is that we've had society glorify the whore, so to speak, versus before when they glorified the Madonna. Now, I personally don't think either should be glorified. I think that we should understand the full spectrum of female sexuality, and um, but that doesn't to remove the fact that for a woman, yeah, it's good for her to wait. It's good for her not to indulge in this stuff. And I understand a lot of women did it because they didn't realize it, and I think that there's room for us to be compassionate. You take this on a case by case basis, whether you want to actually be with a girl like that. You mostly have to see where you yourself have been messed up, right? And where the things that you yourself have done. But anyway, this is just the sort of point here is that I'm not a purist, okay? Because I don't purism doesn't work. It's never worked. It never will work. Jackson, I'm increasingly convinced watching porn is one of the lowest vibration things you can do. Interfacing with strippers, prostitutes is probably better, to be honest. Generally speaking, not in all cases. I actually agree with you, Jackson, because at least when you're with and I haven't actually been with one, so I don't know, but I'm imagining this. If you've been with a stripper or prostitute, presumably you have to interact to a certain extent with a person. So there's a more immediate kind of experience that you have to ground and probably learn from. Porn is like AI almost. You're not dealing even remotely with a real person. Everything is completely fantasy. If you go and deal with a prostitute, at least there's some level of you having to experience the energy, right? You can compartmentalize it much differently with pornography than you can with an actual person. And anybody who's been through a one night stand knows that you're going to feel this different energy from the person. And it actually kind of makes you feel nasty in a lot of cases. You don't want to do it anymore. But here's a big thing. So we talk about, okay, so you have all these regular girls today. What are we supposed to do with them? How are we supposed to stop this stuff from happening? One of the big problems is that you have this idea that it's men who need to go and police these girls. And so you have the whole thing like fathers need to go protect their daughters and fathers need to do this or this or this, whatever. What's the problem with this? What's the problem with this idea about men needing to be more in the picture, policing their daughters, etc.? Well, the problem, oh, by the way, tea, that's what I'm getting here. It's like a rooibos tea. Very interesting. The problem here is that women police women, not men. As Dr. Dynamis said on Twitter a few weeks back, there are cases for, so to speak, the big pimp hand, right? Where the guy needs to put some pressure on police. And look, I'm not going to dispute for a second that the presence of a father is important to making making the daughter have a correct relationship to men. The father defines her dynamic with men, how she expects a man to treat her, and how regulated and emotionally grounded and stable her relationship with men are going to be. Is she going to be anxious, looking for their attention? If the father is distracted or if the father is indifferent, whatever. But the thing is, fundamentally, that is not even the father, let alone the man in her life's job to keep her from going out and being promiscuous. And as Jackson says, it takes personal responsibility from the daughter, but women learn from other women. And the main problem we have today is that women are learning bad things from other women. Okay. I put this out on Twitter a while ago, but, because there's a big push against women on social media. I got to tell you, there's a whole group of IG mommies. They're these attractive Christian families, right, on Instagram. And yeah, they're rich and they have like a nice lifestyle, right? But when a lot of women will see these mothers, they got big families, they're looking all nice and fashionable and fit. They got a handsome husband. Girls will look at those women. They'll be like, I want that. And it draws them to it. But in the absence of that, they have someone like Kim Kardashian. They have like a total, like, whore to look up to. And that's the real problem, right? That's the real problem. The real problem is that women get their cues from other women. And so what you have is a lot of these single moms, not all, of course, not all, um, but a lot of single moms, they have bad issues with men because of what happened to them. They may have left their relationship because they had a problem with the daughter's father. And so either they themselves will preach to their daughter that they should be free and that they shouldn't be tied down, or that they should go, explore and have fun, or they simply mirror it through their own behavior because that's how they act. And the reality is that other girls look at that, and that's where girls get their cues. Historically, it was not the father who really had this massive, I mean, he had an influence, don't get me wrong, but what kept the girl from acting in a promiscuous manner was the fact that other women would destroy her socially. She'd become a complete social outcast. Her mother and her grandmother would be the first to call her a harlot, a whore, a slut. They would wreck her reputation because it's women that police other women, right? And you can see it today. Like men actually have sort of a very complicated relationship with promiscuous women, because on one hand we don't like it because we were like, well, where are all the good girls? On the other hand, though, if we're being honest, a lot of us really do like it because it triggers our desire. So we might say, well, okay, I don't really want anything serious with that girl, but we still might want her, or we might find the whole thing amusing. But it's other women that get really upset. Like, if you've ever been in a relationship, it's like some girl, it's funny how, like, when girls are single, they're all over, like, they might be pretty, like, whatever about how a girl acts these days. Not always. Some old habits die hard of women slut shaming, single women slut shaming other single women. But the real slut shaming comes from women in relationships who see a girl who's acting slutty and open for business. Those women get really pissed at, like girlfriends and stuff get really pissed at those women because they understand them as being threats to their relationships. And so you have this dynamic between, the committed girl and the single slut, the homewrecker, and they have this sort of war with each other, just as you could say the provider and in the chat have some sort of fight with each other. The guy who's like, the nice guy who's doing everything right and, pillar of society, versus the guy who kind of sneaks in and is a bit of a homewrecker. Men police other men, right? If a guy seduced your sister and took her honor from her, well, her father and her brothers, they might be disappointed in their sister slash daughter, but they're going after the guy, right? So the men police other men. The father's job with a daughter is sure to help set, of course, her integrity and everything like that. But fundamentally, he lets the other men know not to mess with his daughter. It's the mother who tells the daughter essentially how to act. And here's one of the reasons why. And this is never talked about, and it's incredibly important because some guys are sitting here like, well, why can't the father do that? The father, of course, does it to an extent, but if the father goes too heavy on it, and especially if he does it in the wrong way, what you often will get is a backlash against the father. So she's going to act in a certain way because she develops this relationship to men as a result of the father. So he's a controlling guy. So she's going to seek out a guy where she doesn't have to be controlled. That is less likely to happen if it's a response to the mother. Okay, so it's really interesting to see these dynamics, things that have really been kind of forgotten in the modern era. Um, the biggest issue that we have today is we have a generation of wine ants who give terrible advice to young women. And the biggest thing that we can do is encourage women to be positive influences and encourage women who are living healthy, wholesome lives to plaster that shit everywhere. Because young girls, a lot of them, by their nature, they are not okay with OnlyFans stuff. And even though it's been normalized and even though they've been told to go out and hook up, even if they may have gone out and they may have done it just to fit in a little bit, maybe they had a hookup or two and they don't really like it. It doesn't really work for them, but they're being carried around with the crowd. If they can find a crowd that doesn't put that stuff on them, totally different story. Jackson, women have been psyoped hard. Cool that we're seeing a return of healthy feminine archetypes, even if it's through Instagram. This is fire. I appreciate it, man. Yeah, a lot of really good stuff on Instagram. Um, you know, I've like, and the women are finding it themselves too. Like, they want, like, with my wife, like, had no idea the kind of stuff that she was looking at on Instagram. She doesn't really use it very much to post her own stuff. And I found out, and she's like really obsessed with all these like IG mommies who are like, I'm like, look, she's like, can we get this thing? Daryl Ann is promoting it. I'm like, yeah, for sure. Like, get whatever you want from those, get whatever you want from those women. You know what I mean? Like, if this continues to nest you more and more, um, it's just super powerful stuff. Ben, what about men with backlash against their own fathers? I used to have a bad relationship with the provider pillar of society archetype. Well, men certainly go against their fathers, and it's a truism that men either try to become like their fathers or make up to them or make up for what they did, right? It's kind of like a man is either going to be the exact opposite of his father or he's going to try to exceed his father. That's basically what happens. Um, it just takes a level of having to go, and it's actually like a level of forgiveness. You go and you forgive him, and then you start to say, you know what, he had his problems but not all of it was bad, and then you begin to integrate the two things together so that you are neither trying to live up to him nor rebel against him, but to be yourself, to be exactly who you are without your father defining you in either direction, honoring him, but not, being defined by him in either direction. It's very interesting how this plays out with women, though, and the relationships with women, because you see this, that if a woman has a bad mother, if like a woman has like a promiscuous mother, she's either going to be hugely promiscuous herself, or she's usually going to try to have the exact opposite and is going to be maybe quite shut down in that department and try to have a lot of kids and be just like a good, good girl, try to make up for the fact that she didn't really have a family. Of course, she ends up passing on a lot of her own baggage to her children as a result of that stuff. So, at any rate, the point of this whole chat is that you're always going to have the sluts. Like Jesus said, you'll always have the poor, you will always have the whores. You're always going to have them. Nothing wrong with them. They have a place. Um, I'm not saying that it's a fortunate thing for those women. I'm not saying it's a positive thing, but um, they understand something that your average woman doesn't. And maybe in time, what we'll see happen is much more of an integration across the board, not simply the good girls developing that side, but these girls not needing to be consumed by their shadow. We may yet see it happen in our lifetime. But for now, we can hope for the best. We can do what we can to raise the consciousness of the planet. But we, at the same time, cannot be naive. And the reality is that these are things that exist, and we want to give them their space, right? Their space to do their thing, and allow the rest of us to develop and to live happy and healthy lives as a result, to transcend it, to integrate. And well, yeah, as you say, Jackson, long live the long live the sluts, and we'll pour another one out for the sluts, right? How many of us, if we're being honest, I just want to make this last comment. I mean, how many guys who ended up thinking that they were the man, right? At a point when they needed it most, when they were getting rejection after rejection, that one of those girls was in the vicinity, gave him the eye, and that guy got laid as a result of that girl. And that interaction changed his relationship with himself. That girl may have done that weekend after weekend with a different guy. And that's kind of gross to say that out loud. It may not have been that extreme. But the point is that these girls have always been very beneficial for guys, in the sense that a lot of guys have cut their chops with them. They've been an outlet. And frankly, because those girls are so open, in many ways, they help guys to not judge themselves so much and to be able to interact in a healthy way with, the good girls. I'm not saying that every guy should do that. I'm just saying that this is a reality that a lot of guys developed as a result of these women. And, maybe the good girls in their own way, they benefited from having it. So really their issue is a lot different, though. It's more of a internal issue. The good girl hating the slut's more of an internal issue. So at any rate, I'll see you guys for the next show. Cheers. Appreciate you all, and we'll chat soon.